Good morning, good morning. We had a lot to chit-chat about. Alive and well this morning. You can be seated. Alive and well. And it was a tad bit cooler out this morning. We were privileged to get to go to Ohio last week and to a conference, and normally they're in the upper 80s at that time of the year, and they were in the 90s. They have broke records up there. They're never in the 90s like that, but they were in the high 90s. So anyway, I kind of didn't feel sorry for them. I was kind of glad somebody else got some of this heat too. Anyway, this morning we're going to start off. Pastor asked me to teach, and so after prayer, I felt to teach on the keeper of the vineyards is my title. In Song of Solomon 1:6, it says, "Look not upon me because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept." Song of Solomon 2:15 says, "Take us the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines, for our vines have tender grapes." Every person has a vineyard. We may not perceive that we are keepers of a vineyard, but there are responsibilities that we all have for our vineyards. First, we have the personal vineyard of our very own soul that we're supposed to keep. It is perhaps the most important vineyard of all that we are to take the most care of. Our soul is the most valuable possession that we have according to God's word. Matthew 16:26, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" The care of the soul is a very tedious and challenging process. It involves the careful work of plowing, planting, cultivating, weeding, watering, and harvesting. How many of you have ever had a garden? You plant in pretty soil and you go out there in 2 days and there is weeds. Where do they come from? And it's a constant thing of weeds, 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 weeds. Just as a farmer is in a joint venture with God, to care for our own soul will have the joint venture with God. We cannot do this alone. We must have God to intervene with spirit and word to accomplish his will for us. We need constant work of the spirit and of the word. It's not just simple encounters. It's got to be a continuous happening. His will is not just for us, but we have a responsibility of our family. It is one of the most challenging vineyards to take care of in our times. The family has been under the attack of the devil since the first family who lived in the Garden of Eden. He refuses to let the family rest from his attacks. I wish I could tell you that it's a one-time thing, but as soon as you get something fixed, here comes something else. When the children of Israel were about to go into the promised land, God felt it important enough that he would give Moses some advice to pass on to the Israelites concerning the vineyard of the family. They were about to go into another pagan culture, just as Jacob and his sons had been transferred to Egypt. They had been slaves, then wanderers, and now they were conquerors, but God still required a level of devotion to them. In Deuteronomy 6, there are a few principles laid out that help us to see how we are to care for the vineyard of our families. Deuteronomy 6, 1-5, the parents had to have a deep love and reverence for God. Deuteronomy 6, 6-7, the parents had to make sure that there was a constant, conscious, and consistent transfer of truth. The word diligent there means to sharpen. So the way my mind think of sharpening a pencil or a knife. You may use that knife over and over and over, but there comes a point that it wouldn't cut hot butter, so to speak, because you have to sharpen the knife. Or a pencil, you may get that perfect sharpener. You know, back in my day, we didn't have mechanical pencils. You had to sharpen the pencil, okay? But then there would come a point that it would get thick and dull, and it wasn't a good writing pencil. And what did we do? We sharpened it. And that's what God expects. We need to diligently sharpen. In the Hebrew, this word would signify the ideal. You are to intensely to sharpen your sons. This kind of instruction is not passive, but it's aggressively active, and it will require attention, time, and effort for it to be accomplished. From a wilderness of manna and quail to a land of milk and honey, which defines the possibility of falling to the snare of materialism. They had gotten used to quail. Didn't have to work for it. Just walk out, and there it is. And then they got to go to a land of milk and honey. This is only overcome when there is a constant element of gratitude and humility in one's heart. We are responsible for our families, how you teach your children, what you teach your children, and the priorities you teach your children. And we have a responsibility to help with the vineyard of the church. It's not just our families, but the vineyard of our church. Obviously, God gives us pastors and spiritual leaders as primary directors of the role of taking care of the vineyard, but the fact still remains that we all, everyone in here, has a part that we play. And it's important that we play the part we're supposed to play. Acts 2:42 sums up everything we must do. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. You're like, again? You're talking about families and prayer again? Yes, I am, because that's two things that we should never, ever not do. I've told my kids before, and I believe this. I've told Amber, if y'all are not better than who I am, I have failed as a parent. I want my kids to be 10 times better, and they are better. They're musically inclined, and I'm not musically inclined. Let's just leave it that way. But I want them to be better. I want them to be more talented. I want them to be closer to God. I want them to become better in the kingdom than I am. I want them to have a better job than I did. I worked for years in the public. I want them to do better. I want them to succeed. That doesn't make me jealous as a mom. It makes my heart glad and big that they are better. They were devoted to learning. They learned the apostles' doctrine. They were devoted to fellowship. They loved each other. They were devoted to worship. They gave themselves to prayer. All of these things working together served as an excellent foundation for the early church to take off and accomplish incredible things for the Lord. Song of Solomon 1:6 says, "They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept." This scripture is an eye-opening scripture to me. There are responsibilities that we have, but often do not live up to. It makes for a wearying journey that is filled with doubt, discouragement, and knowledge that our spiritual walk could be on a much higher plane, in a much higher place. But I have to take care of my vineyard. This vineyard keeper is voicing a sorrowful confession of how things really are versus the disarray of the vineyard. Proverbs 24:30 through 34, "I went by the field of the slothful and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding. And lo, it was all grown over with thorns, and nettles had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall thereof was broken down. Then I saw and considered it well. I looked upon it and received instruction." Key word. Key word. Instruction. It's really quiet in here. But we all are flesh, and we're all stubborn. And many times instruction comes across this pulpit from a shepherd who's trying to give us instruction. And we push it to the neighbor behind us because we don't want to change. Key word to our vineyards is we've got to learn to listen to instruction. "Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that travaileth, and thy want as an armed man." The condition of this vineyard was likely a picture of this man's soul. The ground no longer grew grapes that could provide an income for him, but instead was overtaken with thorns and nettles. Every piece of ground would yield something. It will. Whether it's weeds, thorns, nettles, good fruit, good crops. And I have even seen in the garden where the vegetables actually were starting to decay on the vine. The difference in these two outcomes rests solely on the keeper of the vineyard. Look at your neighbor and say, I'm the keeper of my vineyard. Your own soul, your family, and your church are all going to produce some kind of crop. It depends in great measure whether we are willing to invest in the spiritual opportunities that are afforded to us. If you leave it alone when nothing good, then nothing good will come from it. But if you are willing to work diligently at it, you will be amazed at the work God does with our own efforts. The proverb also gives us a picture of a wall that had been broken down. We see that the keeper of the vineyard was lazy, had no understanding. They valued sleep, leisure, a few more treasures, and he ended up being robbed by his low level of vigilance. When walls get torn down through neglect, there are boundaries that are erased and protection that disappears. Remember, you're the keeper of your vineyard. So when you allow the small things, and I didn't get into the little foxes today, but when you allow that negative talk, well, I don't talk it, but you listen to it, you begin to tear walls down that only you can build back up. It doesn't matter if 14 preachers come across this platform, and it doesn't matter if you speak in tongues for 2 hours. When you walk out that back door, you are the keeper of your vineyard. You're the only one that can stop the negative. You're the only one that can stop tearing down the things that shouldn't be torn down. You're the only one that can build them back up. The erosion of the land can take place when the walls are removed. All of these conditions work against the production of a positive spiritual direction in our lives. Broken down walls are the places that the little foxes come through, and the little foxes destroy the crops. You notice he didn't say it was a bear. It's those little bitty cute foxes. They're cute. They're cute little animals. They're pretty. And it's them that sneak through the little holes that we forget to patch up. And before long, there's one. Then there's two. Then there's three. And before long, they have our whole crop. Sometimes we wonder how we go from an awesome, incredible Sunday service, and we walk out of here feeling so good and so fueled up. And then we get by Tuesday or Wednesday, we're on empty. And we wonder why. Why are we on empty? Because we've done nothing to keep our vineyard. Nothing. The first piece of rotten fruit that shows up on that vine, we've got to chunk it. You got to chunk it. The first hole we see in the wall, we have to patch it up. And kill the fox if we have to, no matter how pretty. It's not time to be a vegan. Sorry. Get your gun out and shoot the fox. It only took one season for the fox to come through. It only took one season to do it, but that one season was enough. Walls of doctrine, walls of principle, walls of prayer, character, walls of corporate worship, walls of reading the Word of God are things that sustain the crop in our soul. It sustains our families, and it sustains our churches. But if we're not careful, it's easy. Well, I'm just going to the beach. Nobody's going to know me. There goes a hole for a fox. I just have my own opinion. I ought to be able to tell somebody something against someone. There goes a hole for the fox. I'm only going to prayer if pastor's there. There goes a hole for the fox. I don't want to read my Bible today. I'm sleepy. You got it. Another hole. If the care of our own soul is attended to, our families and our churches will ultimately take care of themselves. The keeper of a physical vineyard always knows the condition of the soil that he is working with. If the soil is too light or if it's too heavy, too moist or too dry, too acidic or too alkaline, too poor or too rich. There are things that can be done to make it more ideal for whatever he is trying to grow. Once the diagnosis of the soil is determined, the keeper then sets about to correct whatever deficiencies that are present. The keeper's goal is to have the vineyard producing grapes. If air and light cannot get in, the branch languishes and no fruit develops. You have to sometimes clear the brush, weed some more. It's constant. Our little garden patch that we had this year, you couldn't go plant something right now. We would have to start from scratch, weed it, plow it. Brother John probably could tell us more about the tomato patch. What you have to do, sometimes you have to add in dirt, nutrients. It's important. The keeper is willing to do whatever it requires. It may require that rocks are dug out. It may require an irrigation system or drainage ditches added. Sometimes you have to add lime, topsoil brought in, and fertilizer to be broadcast. He may have to lift us up from the mud and even move our branch. If there are problems with erosion, he may have to plant grass or shrub along the border of the vineyard to protect the soil. If there's a problem with erosion being created by wind, he may have to put up some windbreaks to keep the soil from being blown into ridges. If the conditions are favorable, he may even have to plant a covering of grass so it will anchor in the soil so the vineyard can prosper. Every one of us are different. And every one of us may have to have different things done for us to keep our vineyard. If the keeper discovers that his soil is too shallow, he may have to resort to plowing deeper so that the topsoil can be mixed with the deeper, unused soil. So my question for you today is, what kind of unused soil do you have? What is way down deep that you've not even touched for God's kingdom? What do you have to offer that you haven't even got the top off of? There's some rich soil down in there in every one of you. It's just we don't like to take the effort to scrape off the top because that's a little bit humiliating to have to scrape off that top. And then when you start digging, it starts hurting because you hit roots and you hit rocks and you hit things that you don't want to hit. And it's a lot of work to work a garden. You get out there and it's a pretty spring day and you're starting, well, after a little bit, your back hurts, your arm hurts, your leg hurts. It's work. You're sweating. But it's worth it for the vineyard of our soul. It's worth it. In the process of this deeper plowing, the keeper has the opportunity to mix in organic material, fertilizer, and other things that will help it to be more prosperous. The keeper will take painful measures to bring us into his purpose. He does. Why would the keeper allow us to go through pain? He does it because there's no other way to get our attention. He does it to nudge us. He persistently nudges us towards the life that he desires for us to live. One of the more prominent parables of the Lord was that the sower, the seed, and the soils. The sower had to contend with 4 different types of soil. The emphasis of the parable is not on the character of the sower, the quality of the seed, but it's on the condition of the soil. Mark 4:3-9 says, "Hearken, behold, there went out a sower to sow. And it came to pass, as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and the fowls of the air came and devoured it up. And some fell on stony ground, where it had not much earth, and immediately it sprang up, because it had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, it was scorched, and because it had no root, it withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no fruit. And other fell on good ground, and it did yield fruit that sprang up and increased and brought forth some 30, and some 60, and some 100. And he said unto them, He that hath ears to hear, let him hear." The character of the hearer has a great impact on the effect of how the word will work. It doesn't matter who comes across the podium. It will only be effective if you open your ears. Only. In care of our soul, it is very important that we give ourselves to state of profitable hearing. I think at the conference, Brother Hughes, Brother James Hughes, Dr. James Hughes, who's going to be with us the next couple of weeks, he said he wishes he had one of those little cameras. So while he preached, you could see on the screen what you look like. I think that's a pretty good idea, personally. But, hey, if Brother Hughes can say it, I can say it too. It is very rare, in fact, almost never, that we have heard anyone address us as how to receive the Word of God. Some may lament that the fact that great preaching has fallen away, but we have to also note that for great preaching to take place, there has to be great hearing to accommodate it. It goes together. Great hearing is indispensable to great preaching. It is also indispensable to the cultivation of good soul in the life of the hearer. We must guard against preventing the truth to gain an access to our soul. We need to avoid the shallow impulsiveness of emotionalism that responds quickly and immediately with feelings, but the will never gets involved in the matter. We are a feel good society. It's got to feel good. We got to have the soft shoes because it hurts our feet. We got to have, everything's got to feel the way we want it to feel or we don't like it. We don't. Everything is feel good. So when we come to church and the great shepherd is trying to move into a service and pastor's trying to push us, if we don't feel the feel-good feeling that morning, we dig in, cross our arms, and we become stubborn. That's what happens. Because we just wasn't feeling it this morning or Tuesday night. We just didn't feel it. It's not about what you feel. Now, I grew up in a society where our mothers spanked us, okay? And it was called breaking your wheel. And the doctors would tell you if you didn't break the wheel by 2 years old, you didn't have them, okay? And I think most of our parents back in the day took that literally. And so we, because some of us were stubborn, all right? But God is a gentleman, and he lets you have your own will. He doesn't break your will. He lets you make that decision. And we must guard. We must guard how we do and how we let our will control us. Just because it feels right doesn't make it right. You know, there's times I have opinions too. Half of you probably wouldn't be here if I voiced mine. I'm just being real honest here. So why does everyone else feel that they have a right to voice theirs? I'm just making a statement. I'm not trying to cause issues, but I have opinions too. Every one of us do, because God created us that way. But we've got to learn to be mature enough in the kingdom of God that you take your opinions to Him. Because if you share them with other people, that's called sowing discord. And that's an abomination. I'm just saying, some of us have some rocks in our soil that we need to get out. Feelings are fleeting, but it's necessary for the will to be involved for those who are going to bear a cross. We have to be careful that our response is not soon choked out by the things that men around us deem to be important. I'm not living for man. I'm living for Him. The keeper of the vineyard also has to keep a watchful eye for those weeds, thistles, nettles, briars, and scrub trees that will turn his soil into being unuseful. These kinds of things take the plant food and the water and consume them at the expense of the vines. All of these things have to be entirely removed from the vineyard, or they won't produce. The vine won't produce. Cultivation is the most effective way to accomplish this, as it stirs the soil and shaves off the roots just below the surface of the ground. Cultivation also works as a deterrent against various forms of fungus and bacteria that will deform the vines. In the parable of the soils, we are told that some of the seed fell to the ground among the thorns. We are told that the thorns are the cares of this world. It is those worries about secular things instead of the sacred things. Some of the cares of this life are the necessary things that relate to our survival on the earth, like food, clothing, work. All of these things involved are important things. But we have certain responsibilities that are given to us, and really, at the core, our job, our food is a gift from God. Ultimately, it's not about us. It's about that the Lord has blessed us. Some of the cares of this life, I'm sorry, I just said that. Food, clothing, and even work are gifts of God that He has given to us to help us to function in life. However, the great deception from the devil is for us to turn those gifts into our little mini idols. Our job becomes more important than church. Our feelings are more important than church. Cooking for a birthday party is more important than church. And not that any of that's wrong. It just becomes an idol. It becomes important. They become idols to us when they are all consuming to the extent that God is entirely squeezed out of the picture in our material pursuits of them. This is when the weeds will begin to rage out of control. And I think what happens so many times is we allow the weeds to come in and they rage, and then we don't know what to do. We get frustrated, but we're not really willing to let the master weed us out. The cares of this life soon become what we are desperate to attain to. The cares of this life soon become what we are desperate to attain to, because they can bring affluence in this world and attention from those who are around us. One thing that I have noticed, usually the ones that have the most weeds are the ones that they just blabber about everything. But the problem is they don't know how to fix it, or they don't want to fix. So all they know to do is talk or to point out faults of everyone else. And I sometimes just want to take them and shake them and say, if you could just realize, if you would turn your heart over to God and let Him do digging, you wouldn't be like this. The capture of these things can bring elements of pride, ambition, control, and self-gratification that lead us to thinking of ourselves as much higher than what we really are. Soon these are the cares, they choke life out of all of our spiritual life to the degree that we sometimes don't even recognize that God's not even in the picture. The keeper of the vineyard also is aware, and he is also aware that pruning is a very necessary task that has to be carried out. Pruning is the removal of any branches or shoots to promote the overall health of the vine. But once again, we have to let Him prune us. If we dig in enough, He will let us be. But pruning is important. There are a number of reasons that pruning needs to take place. There are some varieties of vines that need to be pruned immediately after the harvest in order to avoid having to work around the dead branches in the new season. Pruning of these dead branches eliminates the disease spots and the lesions that may have grown during the period of productivity. The wise keeper knows that he should burn the pruned branches for the most effective elimination of any parasite, lesion, or disease. Pruning is also very effective in shaping the plant and causing new growth to be stimulated. I'm going to pause right here and say, don't end up being the branch that has to be pruned out of a congregation so that God can grow the vineyard that He wants to grow. Because He will. He's an awesome God, and He's a patient God, and He's a loving God. Pastors preached it. We've heard other ministers come through here. But when we're in harvest season, and when it comes harvest season, there's a whole new venue. God doesn't put up with what He normally puts up with. I don't want to be the branch that He has to cut off and throw me off to the side, and He has to burn me in a brush pile because I wouldn't learn my lesson, and I wouldn't allow the vineyard keeper to snip me away when I needed to be snipped away. It's important, but we have to do it. And God has to do it for His vineyard to grow the way it's supposed to grow. He does, and it's important. Pruning helps the branches be more easily assessed by the harvester. It is particularly important with the vineyard of grapes that pruning take place so that the vines are not destroyed because of the weight of the yield. It's important. We've been yielding. POC has been yielding the last several weeks. I don't want to see anyone have to be pruned out because they're hindering the yielding. But we've come too far to let one branch poison another branch. Someone just before church was talking to me, and I said, we've come too far. We fought too many battles. Maybe I'm the only one who's fought battles. We fought battles. We've made some steps, but I'm not willing to give up my battle and my step for one branch. I'm to a point to say, God, prune what you have to prune. Take away what you have to take away. Remove what you have to remove so that we can grow and become the vineyard that we're supposed to be. There's a lot of hurting people out there. There's a lot of people that want to feel what we're feeling in here. And I don't want to be that person that takes it for granted at all. Additionally, the keeper knows that if he does not prune, some fruit-bearing branches, that the overall quality of the grapes will be very limited. This isn't about me. It's about his quality. And you can't get any better than his quality. He's the best. He creates the best grapes, so to speak. And it's important that his grapes are the best that Crowley sees. They don't need to see sour, withered up grapes. They don't need to see sour, bruised grapes. And us go out there with our little bundle and say, or talking about the church, or talking about someone in the church, talking about pastor, talking about what we don't like, who we do like, what we don't like. We're supposed to be a grape. We're supposed to be a part of the vineyard. We're supposed to be a part of him. What are you mirroring when you go out in public? It's important. It's important because this is his vineyard. I just get to be a part of it. And I am honored to get to be a part of it. But neither do I want to go and be side up against someone who's all. Have you ever bought grapes at the store? Sometimes that's frustrating. They're pretty, they're firm, they're nice, and you get home and there is zero taste. Or the bag says seedless grapes and I get home and they have seeds in them. It's frustrating. I don't want to be that kind of grape to someone. When I come up to someone and I invite them, I don't want them to say, oh, you're from that church? Well, I heard this from that church. I don't want to walk away and say, I don't want those grapes. It's important. It's important. As unthinkable as it sounds, the keeper's secret is for more is less. He will risk misunderstanding of his methods and motives because his purpose is for you to cut away immature commitments and lesser priorities to make room for a greater abundance of his glory. Pruning is both stimulating and dwarfing to the plant. The plant is dwarfed because it has been greatly reduced in size. However, the stimulating process sets in almost immediately as the vine starts a rapid growth process that will strengthen it. Above the ground, the plant may be dwarfed, but below the ground, the root system goes to work at expanding so that there is more water and nutrients available to vine as it bears a higher quality of fruit. The pruning of the soul often comes in the form of divine chastisement. I trust that all of us at some point come under the favor of God's chastisement. There is nothing that promotes spiritual growth and maturity like the chastening hand of God. We are pruned by the hand of God for a variety of reasons. Sinful habits that lead us into spiritual hardness, carnality that rules us, detours us into worldliness, stubbornness of spirit, and passions that get out of control. Our reaction to his hand says much about the maturity and motives of our soul. Because of the grape's tendency to grow vigorously, a lot of wood must be cut away each year. Grapevines can become so dense that the sun cannot reach into the area where the fruit should form. Left to itself, a grape plant will always favor new growth over more grapes. The result, from a distance, it looks like luxurious growth, an impressive achievement, but up close is an underwhelming harvest. The grapes are smaller, they're not big, they're not tasty, they're not strong. That's why the keeper of the vineyard cuts away unnecessary shoots, no matter how vigorous, because the vineyard is about the grapes. John 15, 2-4. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine. No more can ye, except ye abide in me. This is also where a lot of people get stuck. They don't want to be pruned. They don't want to be corrected. And they don't want to change. The keeper of the vineyard never underestimates the old adage of weeding, watering, and waiting as a necessary part of the harvest. The vineyard that will make it is the one that has been well watered. All have probably seen a time when plants were wilting down because of a lack of water. If you watered the wilting plant, it is amazing to see what takes place. Sometimes in just 30 minutes. Water is essential to the life of the vineyard. Watering takes place naturally with rainfall, and it takes place artificially with the work of irrigation. The keeper of the vineyard becomes aware that just because the top of the ground may be wet is not necessarily a sign that the roots of the vine have been taken care of. The more fruit that is on the vines, the more water will be required. There has to be continual watering if we are to be fruitful in our walk with God. And there are some clear reasons for it to be done. Watering gives us an opportunity for our understanding to become clearer about God. Watering advances our knowledge and confirms our faith. Watering promotes a sense of order in a vineyard in that the vines can grow uniformly and together so that the harvest may become more productive. Watering stirs our lives to a greater fruitfulness. We must make sure that the watering takes place on a regular basis because the soil of the human heart is not conducive to spiritual growth without it. Temptation is much easier to overcome when the watering process is ongoing. Temptations come frequently to us, and the attack has an ability to wilt and wither the good vines we do have. Therefore, frequent watering helps us to overcome this terrible dryness of the soul that can take place. In 1 Corinthians 3:6, Paul planted and Apollos watered, and God gave the increase. We must be willing to be planted. We've got to be willing to be pruned. We've got to be willing to be watered because the vineyard is at stake.